Good evening, everyone. If you can find a seat, we're going to get started. Thank you so much for being here tonight. My name is Jenna Weiss, and I'm the Associate Director of Public Programs here at the Jewish Museum. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's Dialogue and Discourse conversation with Abigail Rapoport and Rabbi Meir Soloveichik on the Jewish communities and Queen Esther in Rembrandt's time. The Lines of Distinction lecture has been endowed by Barbara and Benjamin Zucker in memory of Lotty and Charles Zucker, and by the late William W. Hallo, the late Susanne Hallo Kalem, and the late Ruth Hallo Landman in memory of Dr. Gertrude Hallo. Tonight's talk is held in conjunction with the exhibition, The Book of Esther in the Age of Rembrandt, on view in our second floor galleries through August 10th. So if you didn't have a chance to visit it tonight, please come back and do so. There are still a few related programs coming up, both virtually and on site, including a panel discussion on depictions of biblical women next Thursday, May 29th. For complete details about all of our events, please visit our website to sign up for our e-news. And now I'd like to briefly introduce our speakers. Rabbi Meir Soloveichik is the senior rabbi of Congregation Shearith Israel in Manhattan, the oldest Jewish congregation in the United States. He is also director of the Zahava and Moshe Strauss Center for Torah and Western Thought at Yeshiva University. Rabbi Soloveichik has lectured internationally on topics relating to faith in America, Jewish theology, bioethics, Jewish-Christian relations, and more. He writes a monthly column in Commentary magazine, and his writing has appeared in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, Mosaic, Tradition, and the Jewish Review of Books, among others. Dr. Abigail Rapoport is Curator of Judaica here at the Jewish Museum. She's previously worked on Judaica within Eastern European sculpture and decorative arts at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Rapoport holds a PhD in medieval art history from the University of Pennsylvania, where she received her MA in 17th century Dutch art. Her prior exhibition, Beauty and Ritual, Judaica from the Jewish Museum, was on view at the Museum of Fine Arts Houston in 2022, and will be traveling to the Frist Art Museum in Nashville in 2026. Rapoport currently serves on the board of the Council of American Jewish Museums, and has been recognized by the Borough President of Manhattan for her work on Jewish art and culture. It's now a moment to please remember to turn off your cell phones before we begin, and join me in welcoming Rabbi Meir Soloveichik and Abigail Rapoport.
Can everyone hear me?
Fantastic.
Great. Wow, what an amazing crowd this evening. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Jenna, for that wonderful introduction. I'd also like to acknowledge a former trustee who might be in the room tonight. I didn't see him yet, but David Shapiro, who actually dreamed up the idea for a dialogue inviting Rabbi Soloveichik into this conversation, which was a brilliant idea. It's a real pleasure and honor to welcome you to this conversation with Rabbi Dr. Meir Soloveichik, which is held in conjunction with our exhibition, The Book of Esther in the Age of Rembrandt, on view through August 10th. I hope you'll all have the chance to see the exhibition. Rabbi Soloveichik and I had a blast spending about 2 hours before this conversation, going through much to discuss. This exhibition explores a moment in time when the biblical story of Esther, also known as Megillah, a tale of resilience and courage for the Jewish people in the ancient Persian diaspora, powerfully resonated with a city forged through its own long fight for independence. I'm gonna just take the clicker here. Our setting is actually not ancient Persia, but 17th century Amsterdam, a thriving cosmopolitan city at the heart of the Dutch Republic. This was a place of trade and tolerance where waves of migration and struggle helped shape this resilient city, one that eventually flourished after its hard-fought War of Independence against the Spanish monarchy, the most powerful ruler of the time. And Esther's story spoke powerfully to a city and a people in the midst of this transformation. Amsterdam had actually become a magnet for Jewish and Christian immigrants, people fleeing persecution, violence, or seeking new beginnings. And here on the screen, you can see the roots of this migration. I know Rabbi Soloveichik is very excited to use the clicker, so after my turn...
And the laser pointer, I'm especially excited about that.
I'm warning you, he might even point the laser clicker at some of you. He's very, very excited about it. So you'll have your turn after I'm done with these few slides.
I'm watching you, Abigail.
So here you can see these roots of migration. Among these immigrants were Sephardic Jews, whose families had been forced to convert to Catholicism in Spain and Portugal, also known as conversos, Moranos, as well as other places in the Sephardic diaspora like Venice, Antwerp, and Hamburg, where Jews couldn't practice their Judaism openly. Sephardic Jews began immigrating to Amsterdam actually around 1590. And you can see this route on the screen. I'm going to start using the laser. On the left-hand side of the screen, you can see this route. A few decades later, by 1630, Amsterdam also welcomes Ashkenazic Jews from Central and Eastern Europe. Simultaneously, you have Christian immigrants fleeing persecution, war, or seeking new opportunities. And as the Dutch gain independence, they're definitely not sitting back and celebrating. They're actually setting out into the world, quickly becoming a global trading powerhouse. And in fact, one of their key trading routes and partners becomes the Safavid Persian Empire. The Persian story, the Persian setting of Esther's story, offers this rich lens for the Dutch artists and audiences to actually illustrate the exotic goods and textiles that are passing through Amsterdam at that time, and actually enabling them to explore their identity, their power, and really kind of self-fashioning in a new republic. In this moment of triumph, the Dutch saw the Netherlands as a New Jerusalem, and I'm not the first person to say that. Many scholars have said this. They're seeing themselves as this kind of Amsterdam is this New Jerusalem, really proof of divine favor and hard-won freedom. And in this, Queen Esther especially emerges as this bold symbol of virtue and courage. For the Portuguese Jewish community, and we talked about this earlier, the story of Queen Esther, a woman who conceals her Jewish identity only to reveal it at a moment of moral courage, was not just a biblical tale for them. She was kind of their first converso, so to speak. Jewish rituals and traditions that had previously been banned in Iberia were now allowed in more tolerant 7th century Holland. And on the screen here, you can see a couple of the objects that they are commissioning for Jewish practice once they arrive in Amsterdam. Such works were produced in the finest materials of the day, like the ones you see on the screen, and there's many more in the exhibition. The holiday of Purim especially became a powerful expression of that renewal. They owned and used special objects for the holiday, like the ones you see here, which blend Jewish tradition with artistic language of their new home. Lavishly illustrated Esther scrolls or Megillot actually became a specialty of that community. They became these kind of collector's items. This is one example by the talented Jewish engraver Shalom Italia. This scroll actually came to the Jewish Museum in 1939 from the Jewish community in Danzig, but that's a whole other story for a whole other conversation. And right in the midst of all of this was Rembrandt and his magic, living among Jews and portraying their stories, with this striking mix of heart, humanity, and psychological depth. Rembrandt is bringing forth this innovative visual style and approach to biblical stories that's influencing his contemporaries. And in doing so, he's capturing something essential in these figures that still somehow resonates with us today. So that's a perfect transition to Rabbi Soloveichik. We've journeyed from Amsterdam to the biblical world and back, and now we're lucky to explore these connections with someone uniquely placed to do so. Rabbi Dr. Meir Soloveichik, and I know many of you know him, you're his congregants, is not only one of today's most eloquent voices in Jewish thought, but also the rabbi of Congregation Shearith Israel, the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue in New York, whose roots actually go straight back to the very world of diaspora, return, and cultural exchange we've just been talking about, and we'll explore more of this in our conversation. And rumor has it, if you're ever at the Met, keep an eye out. You actually might find or spot Rabbi Soloveichik in front of a Rembrandt deep in thought, and I've actually heard this myself from others. Rabbi Soloveichik brings a remarkable blend of scholarship, insight, and wit to questions of faith, art, and identity. So it's genuinely exciting to have all in one building tonight, Queen Esther, Rembrandt, and Rabbi Soloveichik. Three very different figures, yet all helping us in different ways reflect on exile, storytelling, Judaism, what endures, and more. So that's a perfect segue to our conversation. Rabbi Soloveichik, I know from our earlier conversations that this painting we see here on the screen, Belshazzar's Feast, really stands out to you. It captures something about what kind of makes you, if I may say, obsessed with Rembrandt. And I'd love to just begin by hearing a little bit about the personal. What makes you so captivated by Rembrandt, an artist who is not Jewish, although many scholars will argue that at one point they thought he was Jewish? What captivates you about Rembrandt's work? What do you think he's doing sort of uniquely in his approach to these paintings?
So first, everybody can hear me? I want to express my gratitude to Abigail for inviting me to do this. The fact that I can come and speak about Rembrandt, a subject of my obsession, and that people will actually want to hear me talk is incredibly excited. I was delighted to learn from Abigail that we've budgeted 4 to 5 hours for this program. So that's really good. And it is true that I do go to the Rembrandts in the Met, but mostly because I'm casing the joint. I've seen the Thomas Crown Affair, and it doesn't look that difficult. So you're all invited to our next event at our home, Rembrandt with Rabbi Meir Soloveichik. It'll be behind the painting of dogs playing poker.
Oh, wait, I promised you the laser.
Yeah, that's it. That's my laser. Thank you.
Watch out.
Yeah. There are many reasons to be obsessed with Rembrandt, and one can have no interest in Judaism whatsoever and still be obsessed with the way that Rembrandt, in stark contrast to the artists that came before him, sought to highlight the genuine humanity of the subjects of his paintings. Simon Schama said about Rembrandt that in his eyes there were no grotesques. Rembrandt paints elderly people. Rembrandt paints disabled people. Rembrandt is incredibly interested in painting blind people. Rembrandt is not Rubens, and Rembrandt is interested in showing the genuine beauty of the human being, which is beyond superficial beauty itself. Rembrandt's paintings highlight really what God said to the prophet Samuel when he was looking for a new king and sought someone that looked like Saul, meaning tall and good looking. And God says to Samuel, and this is my favorite Bible verse, and it's important because in America, when you run for president, they ask you what your favorite Bible verse is, so I'm ready. But God says, Al tabet al mareo vel gova kamato kimastio. Do not look to his appearance, for I have rejected these. Because God does not see as man sees. Ki adam yireh lo einayim v'Hashem yireh lo levav. Man looks superficially, but God looks to the heart. And Rembrandt is incredibly interested in what it means to showcase, to see beyond sight, to use a visual medium to show you the inner character of the human being. Now, the question then becomes, what happens when Rembrandt applies that goal, not just to human beings in his own time and place, but to the characters of the Tanakh, the characters of the Hebrew Bible. So here too, Rembrandt is interested not just in showing a story, but in actually engaging in biblical commentary by highlighting the actual characteristics of these biblical figures and showing thereby deep insight. And this is perhaps the most entrancing thing of all for someone who is a rabbi, Rembrandt, the only old master to live among Jews, clearly seems to be drawing on certain Jewish traditions in depicting these stories. So one of the best examples of this is the painting you see, which is in London's National Gallery. This is Belshazzar's Feast. Was painted by Rembrandt in the 1630s. And just to give the basic sketch, this is from the book of Daniel. Belshazzar, who is either Nebuchadnezzar's son or grandson. Nebuchadnezzar is the one who destroyed Jerusalem, conquered Jerusalem, destroyed the temple. He has a feast, and to celebrate, he very arrogantly brings out the vessels of the temple, and a hand comes out of the nowhere, like the Thing from the Addams Family, if you're familiar with truly great art, and writes something on the wall. And that is the source, that scriptural story is the source of the phrase, the writing was on the wall. Yeah, you didn't know that, right? That's cool, right? I myself found it out like yesterday or something. No one can read it in Belshazzar's court. They can't make heads or tails of the message. And so they're searching for somebody who can understand it. So it's a clear parallel to the Joseph story in Pharaoh's dream. And so they bring in Daniel, who is a Judean, and he is able to read it. And he tells them that this is what it says. It says, "Mena mena takel ufarsin." Mena mena means the years of your reign have been numbered. Takel means you have been weighed in the balance and found wanting. And ufarsin is a pun. It means both paras, that now your kingdom will be divided, but it will be divided by paras, which is Persia and Media. And that, of course, is how ultimately Achashverosh, as king of Persia, will rule the Jews. And so that's the message. And that evening, Belshazzar is killed in his sleep, and Persia conquers Babylon. So that's the story. But there's an obvious question when you read the story, which is, the phrase "mana mana takelu farsin" is not Hebrew. It is Aramaic, which is the language that Belshazzar, king of Babylon, spoke. That was his language. And these letters that you see here, more on that in a moment, that's what's called Ktav Ashurit. That's a script he would have understood. So why could he not read the message? What do you need Daniel to explain the message? And so there are various different explanations. But one explanation in the Talmud is that, and this is all the Talmud says, is that the writing on the wall did not say "Mena mana takelu farsin." It said "Mamtus nankafe aralan," which is gibberish, even in Aramaic. Even in Aramaic, it's gibberish. So it doesn't explain what that means. But living in Rembrandt's neighborhood was a rabbi by the name of Menashe ben Israel. Portuguese Jewish community had 3 synagogues originally, and then it united into one synagogue with all 3 rabbis becoming leaders of that community. The rabbis did not get along with each other. This was the only time in Jewish history that happened. But Menashe ben Israel was probably the least respected rabbi in his community, but the most respected Jew in the world at the time, because he was a public intellectual who published. And one of his books, we know this from later, was published after Belshazzar's Feast. He explains the Talmudic passage, that what it means is, and as an art historian, I'm going to have to use the laser pointer at this point. What it means is, he says, is that it was written in a way that you're supposed to read the message vertically. So Mamtus Nankafe Aralan was written horizontally, and if you're just reading it the way you would usually read something, it's gibberish. But he knew to read it, Mena Mena Takel Ufarsin. Okay? Now, what's amazing about this, of course, is that Rembrandt didn't study Talmud. He didn't do Daf Yomi, right? So how would he know this? And clearly, he got this either directly from Menashe, who lived, around the corner from him or in the neighborhood, or from a Jew in that neighborhood. There was no other way that Rembrandt could have gotten this. No Christian says this explanation. But what's amazing about this is that Rembrandt went out of his way to put this in the painting. There are other artistic depictions of the story of Belshazzar's Feast, and most artists just don't paint the message. They just show Belshazzar looking like this, really scared. But he went out of his way to do that. And this highlights the point that, as Stephen Nadler writes in his magnificent book, Rembrandt's Jews, no artist more than Rembrandt, went out of his way to utilize Hebrew or at least Hebraic writing in his art. Now here's the craziest part of all. If you look at this painting, there's a mistake. Does anyone see the mistake? So the mistake is here. It's, again, Menamena Takel Ufarsin. That should be a nun. Is that a nun? What is it? A Zion. Okay, so here's what's amazing. Okay? This painting was x-rayed. Okay? And underneath, there's a nun. Okay? So, I know Rembrandt is magic. So, what happened is that Rembrandt had painted the entire thing clearly with the help of somebody who knew how to do it, presumably somebody Jewish. And then he thought from an artistic perspective, it would be way cooler if the hand was in the middle of writing instead of being finished writing. Because the whole point of the painting is it's trying to show motion, right? The glass, the goblet is spilling, this is spilling. Everything is, he's trying to show motion through a stayed medium. And so he decided that he would redo that letter, but he got the letter wrong and he did a Zion. So we have a mistake from now on for the last almost 400 years in this painting. But it also highlights, I think, probably one of the first times in the history of art that a great Western artist incorporated a rabbinic interpretation in his scene. And that's just wondrous. How could you not be entranced by that?
Amazing.
Yeah.
And I also want to just take a minute to recognize that there's sort of the Rabbi Soloveichik camp on Rembrandt and the Jews, and then sort of other current scholarship.
We call the former camp the correct camp. That's the...
And we talked a lot about this before, and I actually think the audience would be interested in hearing that, you know, why is there this recent shift in the scholarship towards actually thinking, second guessing, right? Saying, well, did Rembrandt really know Menashe ben Israel? Did he really talk to him? And what I really kind of respect you for is that you are kind of in the other side of this camp saying, no, you're seeing something deeper in these paintings. So maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
So leaving aside the deeper aspect of just the biblical commentary, which is coming from Rembrandt himself, there clearly are certain cases where Rembrandt is incorporating rabbinic interpretations. Short of someone telling him a midrash or a Talmudic explanation, it's hard to figure out where he gets this from. This is the ultimate example. So this was published in a book by Menashe ben Israel, this interpretation of the story of Daniel. So it had to have come either from him or from somebody who studied Menashe ben Israel's book. Do we know for sure that he was friends with Menashe ben Israel? I mean, in the 1650s, Menashe ben Israel published a book, La Pietra Gloriosa, and the illustrator for that book was Rembrandt in the first edition. So presumably they had something to do with each other.
And their neighbors.
And their neighbors. Now we can't say too much, right? There are people who want to make Rembrandt into like a rabbi. Like, you know, that he was like, his studio was like a Chabad house in Amsterdam, right? That's not what it was. And Rembrandt got into fights with his Jewish clients. He felt that they didn't pay him right away sometimes. We have letters like that. So it wasn't like he loved all Jews all the time. But even if you take the de minimis, just this painting, it's still much more of a Jewish connection, or at least a rabbinic connection, than Caravaggio or Rubens or Poussin or anybody like that. So even the de minimis is incredible. So it is true that there is now a pushback against the idea that there's a Jewish affiliation of Rembrandt, and I consider myself helping the pushback against the pushback. But it doesn't mean that every time there's a possible Jewish connection, we just assume that and put it in the special rabbinic category that is known as too good to check, right? That's not what this is. This is undeniably a Talmudic explanation that appears in Menashe ben Israel's book. Even if he didn't get it directly from Menashe, it's still pretty incredible.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, you know, we can turn to the, you have the clicker.
Oh,
so
I do. I have
power
the power,
now.
the sole ultimate
we
power.
We could turn to the you know, covenantal scene of Moshe with the Ten Commandments. And I feel like the Belshazzar feast is sort of the golden proof, right? That's like Menashe ben Israel's interpretation visualized in this painting.
Yeah.
Just today, I heard you talk about the influence possibly of the writing the Ten Commandments. And I think this is a much more well-known story. I'd love to hear you speak to, the possible influence on this kind of, quintessential covenantal scene.
Sure, I'd be absolutely delighted. I'm obsessed with this painting. And just before we start, we should just note what Rembrandt does here, before we talk about the Torah, which is that, as Simon Schama notes, the most famous artistic depiction of Moses until this point is Michelangelo's Moses, which of course has horns, which is a mistake based on the Hebrew karan or panav. Karan means horn, karan just means he had rays of light. And as Schama notes, Rembrandt hints to this by giving Moses two tufts of hair that come up here. So he shows Moses as bald, because smart people are usually bald. Many great rabbis are bald. Grass doesn't grow on busy streets, obviously, people. But he hints to that. So as Simon Schama says, if you want to know the difference between Michelangelo and Rembrandt, it's that Michelangelo's Moses has horns and Moses does not. But what's most amazing is this. Now, we have to understand what's amazing about it. It's not just that he puts in the Hebrew of the Ten Commandments. More important is the actual division. The standard artistic depiction in the Christian West of the tablets, whether the commandments are being written in Hebrew or otherwise, is to put 4 commandments on the first tablet, ending with, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, and then starting the top of the second tablet with, honor your father and mother, kabed et avicha v'et imecha. That's everywhere, including the other amazing tablets of the Ten Commandments that I've held, which is the tablets of the Ten Commandments that Cecil B. DeMille used in filming the Ten Commandments. That's now in Cedar Sinai Hospital in L.A., because they were gifted to Mount Sinai Hospital in L.A., because of course the tablets belong in Mount Sinai. So, and I've held them. But there, he used the original Hebrew, Ktav Ivri, but he divided it 4 and 6. Why? There's actually a logic to that. The logic is because you're dividing the tablets between obligations to God and obligations to man. So you divide them up. You'd end the first tablet with, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. That's an obligation to God. And then the obligation to man begins with what? Remember, honor your father and mother. Jews don't do that. Jews divide them 5 and 5, because for us, the love that father and mother embodies is a reflection of the love of our divine parents. And honoring our parents is a way of honoring God. So what Rembrandt has here, you see only the second tablet, but you see the top is not honor your father and mother. Rather, it's lo tirtzach, thou shalt not murder. So he's dividing it up Jewishly. So even when there are other artists, so there is an Italian artist that has Hebrew on his Ten Commandments, Guido Reni, but he divides them up Christian style. This is a non-Jew who is giving us a very Jewish division of the tablets. Now, here we get to the interpretation part. What scene is this, actually? What scene from the Torah is this? This is the most interesting part, I think. What is this? Is this Moses smashing the tablets? If you go to the museum where it is, which is the Gemälde Gallery in Berlin, it will say that. Moses zerschmettert die Tabletten die Gesetze. Moses shatters the tablets. But Moses does not look angry here. Right? And so there are those that suggest, I think rightly, that what he's giving us here is not the smashing of the first tablets, but rather the bestowal of the second set of tablets in forgiveness after the sin of the golden calf. This is Yom Kippur, when Moses comes down with the second tablets. Rembrandt is giving us the Yom Kippur. So I'll just share one story about this, because I think you asked me when we were talking, do I ever travel to see Rembrandts? And so I was obsessed with this painting and its possible Jewish influences. So I was going to a bar mitzvah in Israel, and so I decided that I would stop off in Berlin to see the painting. So I went and I studied it, and then I went to the airport for the flight to Israel. And probably because I had a one-way ticket from Berlin to Tel Aviv, I was taken out for extra security questioning. And so the LL security agent, she said, Ivrit, Anglit, Hebrew, English. So I said in Hebrew, Mashat Madifa, whichever you prefer. I was showing off, and she did not seem impressed. And so she says to me in Hebrew, she says, Are you from Berlin? So I said, no, I'm from New York. So she said, what do you do in New York? So I said, אני משמש כרב של בית כנסת הספרדית פורטוגזית. I'm the rabbi of the Spanish Portuguese synagogue. So and welcome to everybody from the congregation. Thank you for coming. So, yes. So I said, I'm the rabbi of the Spanish Portuguese synagogue. So she said to me, do you speak Spanish or Portuguese? I said, not one word. And now she thinks this is like the worst cover story that anyone has ever come up with. So then she says, how long were you in Berlin? So I said, a couple hours. So I said, why did you come? So I said, Bati lirot Rembrandt. I came to see a Rembrandt. So she looks at me with disbelief and says, you flew to Berlin just to see a Rembrandt? So I take out this picture on my phone and I say, Ze lo rak Rembrandt, Ze Moshe Rabbeinu. It's Moshe. And I start explaining first set of tablets, second set of tablets. And she says, just get back in line. Okay? Because I could be a terrorist, but she is not going to hear a Dvar Torah from a rabbi. So that's my story with this painting.
That's really amazing.
Yeah.
And when we were talking earlier, you also introduced another figure into the picture here.
Yeah.
We know that Rembrandt had a teacher, which
Yes.
is quite amazing. He studied, even briefly, before he moves to Amsterdam, he studies in Leiden, his hometown, with Peter Lostman, who also trains other artists.
Who is in this exhibit.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
the exhibit is so incredible, Abigail. You did such an amazing job. Thank you, really.
Thank you. And what was really interesting, I believe you said something like, Rembrandt is always thinking a few steps behind or
Right.
ahead. He's choosing different moments to depict,
Yes.
or to depict it in different ways that highlights a certain Jewishness,
Right.
if you will. And so I just love kind of bringing in the teacher into comparison as
Yeah.
a way to see the influence or the deviation.
Yeah. So this is actually a super interesting subject here to study. So this is the story of Bilam and the donkey. So this is Peter Lostman. That's Rembrandt's Rebbe. Rembrandt studied in Amsterdam when he grew up in Leiden. Then he went for 6 months to Amsterdam to study with Lostman. And then he came back to Leiden. And he made this while he was in Leiden. And you could see that it's a tribute, as it were, sort of. It doesn't look like a Rembrandt, this, right? This is Rembrandt when he's very young. You should note as well, it's hard to see here, but this is Bilam's notes. And it's not in Hebrew. Rembrandt wasn't using Hebrew at this point. This is in the Musée Curator in Paris. My wife and I, we went together. We took the channel from London just to go see this painting and to look carefully at it, to go very closely. The security guard at the museum loved that, to see if there's actually Hebrew on it, and there isn't. So Rembrandt wasn't doing Hebrew at this point. But it's seemingly the same scene. But it isn't, and this is a point made by Simon Schama in his biography of Rembrandt. So this scene, so just to review the story very briefly, Bilam is on his way to curse the people of Israel, and an angel stands in his way, and the donkey sees the angel, but Bilam does not, and he starts hitting the donkey, and then the donkey. It's a very Jewish scene. The donkey starts to kvetch and speaks to him and says, what did I ever do to you? I'm this donkey. I worked for you my whole life, and this is how you treat me. And that was the exact accent he used, by the way. And so Lostman gives us painting with the angel in his path, right? And the donkey is speaking. That's why Bilam's eyes are bugging out, right? Like he's surprised, right? Like when the human speaks in the Planet of the Apes, right? It's like they're excited. He can talk, right? They're excited about that. I see only a few people got that. Michael, that reference was for you, Michael. Okay. And so like his eyes are like cartoonishly bugging out here in the Peter Lostman painting. And so as Schama notes, what Rembrandt does is he gives us something very different. It looks almost the same. But if you take a look, instead of his eyes bugging out, his eyes are very dark. You see that? Okay? I love this laser pointer. This is like so amazing. Okay? Why is that? Because this is actually before Bilam realizes that the angel is in front of him. He's emphasizing the fact that Bilam is blind to the angel. And what that means is that Rembrandt actually keys in to the most interesting part of this story, which is not that the donkey talks. Because if you look at the story, when the donkey talks, Bilam replies to him. Like, he doesn't say, hey, you can talk, right? That's not what he says. The donkey says, why are you beating me? And Bilam just replies, because you stopped still. He doesn't even say, that's weird that my donkey is talking to me. Because Bilam is some sort of necromancer, and weird things like that happen to him all the time. What's striking is that he is a seer who doesn't see. It's that there's an ethereal being in his presence, and he cannot see what his animal can see. Probably because he's too excited about making money by cursing the people of Israel. So he's on his way to do that. And when you're excited about something, you don't know. Sometimes you miss even what's right in front of your face. Bilam's phrase that he says after the angel reveals himself is, Chatati, ki lo ra'iti sha'ata omed lenegdi. I have sinned because I didn't notice that you were standing in front of me. I missed you. And so here you have a young Rembrandt, doesn't look like a Rembrandt, but he takes the scene that his teacher has painted, but he does it slightly differently, highlighting that he's interested in not the outer drama or superficial drama of the story, the donkey that talks. He's interested in the phenomenon of what it means to be Bilam and not notice the angel that's right in front of your face. And there are many cases like that where Rembrandt will do something slightly differently than everyone who has come before him.
So amazing, really interesting. And I feel like that inner drama actually comes out in two of your favorites that you actually mentioned to me, both the sacrifice of Isaac and then the next painting about Jacob blessing Joseph's sons. And I just would love to hear you speak about that kind of inner drama, the complexity too. Like, Rembrandt also chooses the hard moments, not necessarily the kind of over the top histrionic drama.
So here, these two paintings are great examples of Rembrandt as parshan, of Rembrandt as commentator on the Torah. Because Rembrandt will go out of his way to add a detail that is not in the text. It's like a midrash of his own. But the midrash is highlighting the human dimension of the story, the interiority aspect of the story. So that's certainly the case with this amazing depiction of the binding of Isaac, which is in the Hermitage. And again, Rembrandt is trying to show motion. This is in all other paintings of this scene. You don't have this where Abraham drops the knife sort of in shock when the angel calls out to stop the slaughter of Isaac. But even more amazing is this. This is not in the text, and this is in no other painting. There are so many scenes of the Akedah, so many. I think Lostman has one, his teacher, which is in the Rembrandt House Museum. Caravaggio has several famous ones. There are many depictions of the and the Renaissance was born with the great contest of depicting the what's his name? I forgot the two Italian artists. And the guy who became an architect. The guy was one of them was so mad that he lost the contest that he went and never did art again and became an architect instead, right? This has been depicted in art for forever. But Rembrandt, and only Rembrandt, gives us a scene where Abraham puts his hand over his son's face. Because Rembrandt is basically saying that the only way that Abraham could actually get through this is not to see Isaac's face. So he is thinking, what does it mean to be Abraham in this moment? What is it like? What is it like to be a father told to sacrifice your son? And Rembrandt, of course, has children and faced mortality with his children, as did so many in those times. And so he's trying to understand what is it to deal with that loss. No one else does this. And that's an example of how Rembrandt will add a detail, which, if it's okay, brings us to this. One of my favorite Rembrandt paintings and one of the few of the Bible that I have not seen. This is in Kassel, Germany. Jacob blessing the sons of Joseph. First, there are two elements here that are not in the text. First, there's a person in this painting who is not in the story. Who is that? Yeah. Who is that? What's her name? Asnat. Excellent. Okay. So in the book, in the book Genesis, right? In the Torah. I was like in the book, in contrast to the movie version of the story. So in the book, in the text, we're told that Joseph is told, "Hinei avicha choleh," behold, your father is sick. And so he goes and he says, "Vayikach et shnei banav imo et Menashe et Ephraim." He takes his two sons with him, Menashe and Ephraim. And so they're presumably in Jacob's house. And Jacob says, "Who are these?" He says, and he answers a very interesting phrase. We'll come to it in a minute. And Jacob says, "Kachem na elai va'avarachem." Bring them to me that I can bless them. And sounds like that's all the people that are in this room: Jacob, Joseph, and the sons of Joseph. The rabbis, however, and only the rabbis, place Joseph's wife in this scene as well. And based on her biography, you would expect her not to be in this scene, right? Because who is she according to the Torah? Who is Joseph's wife? Osnat. The daughter of what? The pagan priest of On, right? That's not a great shidduch, it sounds like, right? Make some uncomfortable Thanksgivings with Jacob, right? But in Midrash, Osnat is a figure that embraces the faith of Joseph. And so in Midrashic story, Jacob is worried about Menashe and Ephraim because they did not grow up in the Holy Land. They grew up in pagan Egypt. So he's worried about them. And so the rabbis build on an interesting turn of phrase when Jacob asked Joseph, "Who are these children?" And he says, "Banai haim, they are my sons, asher natanli Elokim," which God gave me, and then he adds a word, bazeh. Bazeh means with this. What is that word? So the rabbis read it that he's pointing to his wife. And Jacob blesses her in her merit. In other words, because she is the embodiment of the rejection of pagan Egypt. So again, this is, and of course I am not the one to come up with this. This is something that many have pointed out. But it is this entrancing point that, I know that, I'm not saying that Rembrandt had a chavruta with Menashe ben Israel and they were studying Torah together and he gave them this midrash. But it's hard to see where he would have gotten it from if not from a Jewish source. And so it's incredibly striking. Incredibly striking. You could talk for a long time about this painting, but I would just notice one more point, and this is what Simon Schama notes. So one other detail that he adds is this fur that's on Jacob. Okay, that of course is not in this story, but it calls us back to an earlier story involving blessings in Jacob, which is what? When Jacob stole the blessings of his brother. So this is like, as it were, the completion of the circle. Jacob's whole life has been in response to that story. And again, I think Rebecca was a hero, and I think Jacob did there what he had to do. But he then was exiled and had so many difficult years, all stemming from that. So Rembrandt wants to close the circle. And so he gives us a small artistic detail, as Shama notes, that brings us back to the original story of Jacob and Esau and the blessings. But of course, the difference is, in this story, both brothers get blessed. Both older and younger get blessed. Even though the younger is elevated above the older, as Jacob was elevated above Esau, here there is fraternity and fellowship. That's a midrash that Rembrandt does on his own. That's the type of painter and parshan that Rembrandt is.
Amazing. I feel like we've covered not all of the Bible, but a lot of the key scenes, and heard your wonderful insights on them. And, I'm just going to kind of pivot to actually Shearith Israel.
Yeah.
Because I was so surprised. One of the first questions I asked Rabbi Soloveichik when we were standing in front of Rembrandt's self-portrait from the Gardener was, when did you become obsessed with Rembrandt? And I was expecting him to say, just like me, I AP art history. I spent my life studying the textbooks. And I was so surprised that it was actually only in 2014, 2016.
13, 14, something like that, yeah.
And I think part of why I was so surprised was because you become such a voice, a leading voice in the field of Rembrandt.
The pushback against the pushback.
He's being modest. He's actually been quoted in a recent catalog called Rembrandt Through Jewish Eyes as like the pushback against the pushback. But I think another reason why I was so surprised was because of your role as a leader of a congregation that literally its roots trace back to the Jewish community in Rembrandt's time. And so I'm curious how much that shapes your thinking, how much that shapes your community today.
Yeah, so of course, to study the figures with whom Rembrandt would have interacted is to study the history of your congregation, because it is their traditions that were brought to the New World. One of the three rabbis of this congregation, Yitzchak Avoav de Fonseca, was the rabbi of Recife, Brazil, which are the roots of our community from which the original Jews of the community came. And so to study Rembrandt's interactions with the Sephardim of Amsterdam is to encounter the roots of your own congregation, which is a wonderful way in which two of your interests suddenly synthesize. So it's absolutely wonderful. And really to understand these people and their culture and traditions, you can't understand them without studying the what Stephen Nadler calls Rembrandt's Jews, because this was really the first time in the history in Jewish diaspora history where you had Jews that were publicly fully devout Jews, but wholly part of the culture in which they found themselves. That's why these were the first Jews that were commissioning works of art. Jews did not commission paintings usually. It's just not something they did. And so it's not usually something, and so these Jews were, Menashe ben Israel is well known because he's writing for a larger non-Jewish audience. And so on the one hand, you have that. And on the other hand, you have the fact that they are seeking to build these large public synagogues right in the middle of their societies, utilizing the best of architecture and the best of design. So this is a wonderful drawing by Romain de Hoch, who is not a Jew, right, depicting the synagogue in Amsterdam. And here you see, who are these people standing in the back during the service? These are non-Jews, because we have records of them. Non-Jews would come. It was like an interesting thing to come see. Now, they were newcomers. They would make basic mistakes, like come on time for services, things like that. Rookie mistake. Anyone could have told them, but that's there's a painting of it. The Emmanuel DeWitt painting of the same synagogue shows like a person under his talit, his prayer shawl, looking interestingly at one of the non-Jews that have come in. And so this is a congregation that saw themselves as fully part of society and fully and openly Jewish. And of course, that was the central theme of the Jews of early America, who found a world that would welcome them as fully Jewish and ultimately, after the revolution, fully American. And so the model of the Jews of Amsterdam, who were not equals in Amsterdam, but came closer than Jews had really come in maybe ever, that very much was in their mind as they built new lives in America.
Yeah, and it's so interesting too. Like it's when you look at this image.
Yeah.
If I had, you could point for me. No,
I'm willing to share the clicker.
The personification of the Dutch Republic
Yeah.
at the very top.
Right. This is
above,
not Jewish, right?
Just above, exactly.
Right.
It's this mingling like iconography. You see
Right.
here the personification of the Dutch Republic paired with tablets of law,
Right.
Judea. And then in Latin, it actually says freedom of worship is the mainspring of republic,
Right.
So it's this idea that Amsterdam is kind of opening up its arms at this time.
That's right.
And you have the Portuguese Jews wanting to fit in, while non-Jews it's like the synagogue is a tourist site for the
Yes,
first time.
absolutely was a tourist site. People came to see it. The Jews were like an interesting thing to see. And there were people originally, this is a little bit later, but earlier in the 17th century, there were people who came from England because there were no Jews in England. And so they came to see Jews. It's interesting. And you get to see, they're not in a ghetto.
Right.
So you could see them just as part of regular daily life. Imagine that, right? And so you have that on the one hand, as you say, you have the symbol of the Dutch Republic, and then you have the blueprint of the synagogue, which is inspired by the layout of the temple in Jerusalem, as all Portuguese synagogues are, wherever they are, large or small. And so you'll have things like another rabbi in Amsterdam makes a model of Solomon's temple,
Right.
and everyone in Amsterdam is coming to see it.
Right.
These are things that are uniquely happening to the Jews of Amsterdam. It's not happening in Krakow at the time. Or for that matter, it's not happening in the Middle East in that way.
Right.
It's a uniquely Dutch experience.
Absolutely. And I'd be remiss to not bring into Queen Esther into this equation. You've written specifically about Rembrandt and Queen Esther in several pieces. And this is, as I mentioned before, Queen Esther's story is something that connects these different communities at this time. So, you describe this mysterious link between these images. And I have to say, after hearing you kind of describe this chiddush, this new kind of piece of information, for a moment I was like, oh, I wish I requested the night watch from the Rijksmuseum.
By the way, I'm amazed that the Isabella Gardner Museum gave you that unbelievable self-portrait of Rembrandt. If you got the night watch out of Amsterdam, that would be like getting the Mona Lisa here at the Jewish Museum.
Next Rembrandt show at the Jewish Museum.
That would be amazing.
But I would love to hear you talk about the link between these two.
So these two, we just have to understand, these were both made by Rembrandt, and they are in a certain sense absolute opposites. This is an etching that's around 6 inches tall, and this is one of the most massive paintings in the history of art. Okay, but they were made at almost exactly the same time. Now it's very dark now. What's called the night watch actually doesn't take place at night. It just got very dark, the canvas. But you have to understand that actually there's a huge arch here that they're coming out of, exactly like this. Okay, so here you see people exploding out of the arch. And here you see people exploding out of the arch. Now, what is the night watch? What's the point of the night watch? When you look at it for a moment, it looks like chaos, but it's actually not. It's actually not. And we could do a whole separate lecture on that there are different, in the midst of the chaos, there's actually order. It looks like everyone's helter-skelter, but there's actually different people doing different things. So like you see a gun, the 3 different steps of a gun being loaded. Here he's loading a gun, he's blowing on the powder over here, and then there's a guy then the gun is being shot from behind over here somewhere. So there's order in the midst of chaos. And the point of this is, as Shama says, central to the Dutch understanding of itself was that they were a tiny republic that rebelled against the Habsburgs, against the mighty empire. And that's why they were obsessed with Esther. That's why you see in this amazing exhibit, so many Dutch artists painted Esther. Stephen Nadler actually writes, I have this here. He writes as follows, it just quotes this. Rembrandt's etching, that's this one you see here, and we have a version of that out in the exhibit, owes much to a painting done in 1617 by his teacher Peter Lassmann, also called The Triumph of Mordecai. This was not Lassmann's only rendering of an Esther subject. Jan Levens tried his hand at the story. He painted the Feast of Esther. Is that the one we have here too? Yes. Wow, this is all here. Jan Victors painted his own version of Esther's banquet. Arend de Gelder produced so many works from the story that had he been an anonymous painter working in the Middle Ages, he would surely be known to us as the master of the Book of Esther. And then he concludes, tellingly, the great and prolific Rubens, a Fleming from the southern Low Countries, court painter to the Habsburgs and Catholic artist par excellence, painted only one scene from the Book of Esther. Okay, so this is a Dutch obsession, which is with the Book of Esther. And so it's no coincidence, I think, and I'm not the first to note this, that this is painted right before this, 1641, 1642, something like that. And they're both just scenes exploding out of an arch. And for Rembrandt, I think they really are one. For the Dutch, they are one. The story of Esther is the story of a tiny people that saves itself. And of course, that is part and parcel of why the Jews received a welcome in Amsterdam. They were not equals, but that did set the stage, that did show Europe that you don't have to hate the Jews, and you could welcome them. And in a very real sense, set the stage for a truly philo-Semitic country that was truly inspired by the Hebrew Bible, which is, of course, the United States of America, and the welcome that we received here.
Amazing. And, fast forward, I first discovered your thinking on Queen Esther actually in your 2020 New York Times piece, Esther, a Heroine for Our Time. I actually quoted in the exhibition catalog. At the time of writing that book, I did not know that this dialogue would happen. I even remember my mother, who's like a Rabbi Meir Soloveichik obsessed fan, was like, you should email him, talk to him. And I just quoted you, cited the article, cited your family too, and you talk really insightfully on how Esther resonates with us at that time in 2020. And I'm curious today kind of how you feel about that. And also I think it's interesting because subsequently you published the Sacred Time book, which is an amazing book. Everyone should read it.
Thank you.
And you talk about how the story of Esther, what's unique about it is that the kind of demands it places on Jewish loyalty.
Yeah.
And even that the word Yehudi, Jew, appears in the
Right.
story of Esther, which is quite unusual. And somehow I'm seeing a connection between these
Yeah.
two pieces. And I'd love to hear more about
Sure.
that.
So just very briefly, the word Yehudi appears, the two words that appear more in this book than in any other book are Yehudi and Melech. Hamelech, Hamelech, Hamelech is a point that somebody else notes, which means this book is both about what it means to be a Jew and what it means to be, what politics is, and how Jews deal with politics. Rightly understood, as others have noted, the most shocking sentence, and we missed this today, the most shocking sentence in the book of Esther is, Ish Yehudi haya b'Shushan habira ushmo Mordechai. There was a Jew in Shushan, and his name was Mordechai. Why is that shocking? Right, because Mordechai is not a Jewish name. We think today it's a Jewish name. Mordechai is a pagan name. If you go to the Pergamon Museum in Berlin, you will see the gate of Ishtar dedicated to the god Marduk. Ishtar and Marduk are pagan names. So to be called Mordechai HaYehudi, Marduk the Jew, is kind of weird. It's like the Jackie Mason routine when he talks about Jews in America taking on non-Jewish names. And he says, I knew someone, her name was Crucifix Finkelstein, right? So Mordechai HaYehudi is like Crucifix Finkelstein. And so the question immediately when you meet these people is, who are they really deep down? Which, as you mentioned, is why Sephardic conversos were obsessed with the book of Esther also. Because ultimately, a test is going to come, and the question is, who is she? And is she a Jew deep down? Is Mordechai a Jew deep down? Now, when Esther makes that decision to defend her people, the important thing we have to recognize is this is also the only book in the Bible where there are no prophets. So usually, if you're trying to figure out what to do in a terrible political situation, you ask a prophet in the Bible, and he tells you what to do. It's easy. So in a very real sense, Esther is where Jewish statesmanship is born. Because this is the first time where somebody has to make decisions. And Esther makes the decisions on her own. Mordechai says, when the decree comes out, what you should do is you should immediately rush into the throne room, reveal that you've been lying to your husband, and plead for your people. And Esther says, that's a terrible idea. I'm not going to do that. Because as my great uncle, Rabbi Soloveichik said, it would be like, imagine like rushing into Stalin's office and saying, I've been lying to you all this time. So what she realizes she has to do is she has to use realpolitik and cunning and cleverness and play on his paranoia. It's like being in the court of Henry VIII, basically. And so what she does is she invites her husband to a romantic dinner for three with the vizier. Now, if you invite your husband to a romantic dinner and you also invite somebody else, don't do that. So, so the point is that turns Achashverosh against Mordechai, against Haman. I'm sorry. And so this is really the first time we ever encounter true statesmanship. So if you ask what it means to us today, much more so than when I wrote that article in the Times in 2020. What it means to have to make difficult political decisions in the face of genocidal Jew hatred. It's unfortunately all too relevant a book for us today.
Well, I actually think that's a really powerful way to end this conversation, this idea of Queen Esther at the center of it all,
Yeah.
both how she can inspire us today, but also the Dutch painted Queen Esther specifically.
Right.
They chose kind of two key moments from the story of Esther, the moment where she intercedes before the king, and then the moment, her banquet, which you see over here. And so I think we should end the conversation there. I don't know if there's time for question and answers, or Rabbi Soloveichik, if you want to add anything. But we just want to thank you from the Jewish Museum.
Thank you.
We are so honored. For me personally, this was a dream. I never thought 5 years ago when I started writing this book and quoting you that you'd be here today. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Just to add, it's incredible to receive an invitation from an art historian to come speak about your passion for Rembrandt. It's really one of the most flattering invitations you can receive. And also, while we've been doing this diversion, many of my agents wearing bowler hats have stolen the Rembrandt. And you're all invited to my house to see it
That
soon.
is a perfect way to end.
Thank you very much. Everybody go see the amazing exhibit.